giving the talk today. So I'll give you a really quick introduction. I think a lot of you know who Jia is. She has several key roles in the Faculty of Engineering and IT. She's now the new director of the CADRE, the Center for Advanced Defense Research Enterprise, a defense initiative to work with university partners. And she's also the co-manager at the ARC Training Center for Medical Implant Technologies. And she's really passionate about developing sustainable innovation ecosystem in Australia. And she's worked in many, many places. She's been with the Victorian Department of Health and Human Services. And over there, she developed the strategy for the health and medical research that we are seeing today or realizing today in many of the things that we do in Victoria. And she's formerly the Director of Health and Life Sciences at National ICT, or NICTA, now Data 61, where she led engineers, research, and computer scientists in a very wide range of area like assistive technology, biomedical engineering, informatics, and so forth. Now, she is a well-established scientist. Before she moved, she always says she moved to the dark side, but I don't think that's really the dark side. To us, it's certainly very bright. And Jia has spent more than 20 years in medical research. She's led NHMRC-funded projects. So she's very much a scientist. And of course, she did her MBA in Melbourne Business School. And following that, she's been doing this very exciting role at university. So without much further ado, I'll pass the time to Jia Yee to give her talk and lecture. Thank you, Jia Yee.
Thank you so much, Peter, for your kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. This session on business model canvas is going to be a really quick tour. I'll spend 45 minutes just highlighting this tool, and then more than happy to then take questions till 2 o'clock. So I'm just going to share my slides, and if you're not able to see it, please do let me know. I'm sharing the slides now. And so the business model canvas is really a tool that came out of a guidebook, which I will show you in the next slide. But it is really focused on the concept of value. So when you're starting a new business, you're very, very excited that you've developed a new technology, and you go, well, I'm going to spin out a company, whether you're based at a university or whether you're someone who has just thought of an idea and then validate it with a few friends and go, I'm going to incorporate a business and a startup. But the challenge is, how are you going to work out the business model to capture revenue? As they say, cash is king or queen. And what does that value look like for your business? And so you need to have a tool to identify opportunities to develop that overarching business strategy. And one of the tools that we use is this business model canvas. Now, ideally, rather than do it as a webinar, it is done preferably face-to-face, and the business model canvas is really 9 building blocks, and you work in a team environment, working out over half a day workshop with sticky notes to really define these 9 building blocks, which in the next 40 minutes or so, I will go through very quickly what it means. But it is, as I said, a tool, and like all tools, it's not a desktop process. So that's what I mean by, it's preferable to run this within a team environment, over whiteboarding and so on, with sticky notes. Because at the end of the day, you do need to, once you do this canvas, go out and validate that. That means talking to the customers, talking to the partners, talking to as many people as you can, whether it's government and investors, to keep validating your model. Now, the model itself, or the tool, really came out of this handbook called Business Model Generation. It was written by Alexander Osterwalder and Yves Pignol, and Alexander was doing his PhD thesis on this, and then wrote the book, and his supervisor was Yves Pignol. And so this tool is a handy tool, and it asks some very fundamental questions which form these 9 building blocks. The first one I'm going to go through very quickly is to talk about the customer. And a lot of confusion arises when some people mistake an end user for a customer. So this context of this webinar is around medical technology. So when we are in a medical technology environment, there is some confusion around, well, who exactly is a customer? Well, the customer is someone I consider as having the money to actually pay for the services or pay for the equipment that you've developed or an app that you've actually developed. The end user is really someone who you can potentially influence, potentially actually use the technology without having to pay. So an example is a surgeon. You never see a surgeon, she would not be the one taking out the credit card to buy an equipment. The customer in this case would be the hospital itself, and the surgeon might be an influencer, or maybe someone that actually encourages the department to actually consider purchasing that equipment or piece of medical device. So need to understand this really important category of customer, because if you don't get who that customer is, then you are potentially targeting the wrong category of people. So I'm going to use the example of 3D Meditech. They are a partner of ARC CIMMIT, and they have been an important partner of ours, and we've played an important role, especially Peter's group played a really important role in facilitating 3D Meditech in developing their 3D printed nasopharyngeal swab. So this 3D printed nasopharyngeal swab was developed from concept to end product and registration on the Therapeutic Goods Administration sort of ARTTG list, took under 200 days. That's extraordinary. And so these are the examples of where 3D Meditech is trying to say, well, who is the customer here? Clearly, there are lots of potential opportunities to then have these conversations. But interestingly, the main customer at that point during the pandemic was really the Commonwealth government, because they 3D Meditech signed a $3 million deal, and this is all in the public information available when you Google 3D Meditech and the National Medical Stockpile of the Department of Health. They made a purchase of these batches of 3D printed nasopharyngeal swabs. So if you think about the customer, well, it was a Commonwealth government, Department of Health. You would not find patients paying for it. You would not find the insurers paying for it. Hospitals may end up being a customer if they buy these types of devices through the state government's Health Purchasing Victoria entity. Health Purchasing Victoria is now rebadged as Health Share Victoria. So worthwhile considering who your customers are. Then if you look at the types of customer and the different types of markets, you can have mass markets, or niche markets, or segmented or diversified markets. So I'm just, rather than go through individually what this means, you all know what a mass market is. You can buy a toothbrush at Woolies, and now what used to be a niche within a hospital setting, you can now get them at Chemist Warehouse and Woolies themselves. What used to be niche, for example, COVID-19 tests or red tests, is now moving into the mass market as a result of the pandemic. So you can see situations or environmental changes affects the way in which you classify your markets. And then there can be potentially segments in your market. So if you have a particular device that is targeted to adults, but you can actually configure it to target to the pediatric market. Well, you can then further segment that market itself. The customer segment can be defined in many different ways. As I mentioned, it could be pediatrics, demographic, could be an adult population. You could even refine it down to a millennial or a baby boomer. You could look at targeting a segment that is a high net worth individual, perhaps looking at behavioral buying power, the value in which you sell that product, and the pricing as well. If you have a premium product, you might be targeting a high net worth individual as well as a low cost product, or sometimes a freemium. And a freemium is something that basically is a loss leader. You don't make money out of freemium, of course, but it basically provides traction to get initial customers in to test your product, and have a percentage of those customers then subscribe to your services in a paying capacity. I'd like to also draw your attention to this particular article called The Elements of Value, that was published through the Harvard Business Review in 2016. So if you'd like to learn more about what are the elements, and so that article gives you about 30 elements of how you can create value through understanding who your customers are. It's well worth a read as well. I do also want to spend some time on understanding value proposition, because this is where some misunderstand the concept of a value proposition. The value proposition isn't about delivering value for the customer if you're selling a product. It's that when you're selling a product, what does that value mean for the customer? What entices the customer to buy your product? Because they have to see some value in purchasing that, right? So you say, why would a customer choose your product or be loyal to your company over a competitor? So it may be that your product is addressing an unmet need. There may be a latent demand, and a latent demand means that there's demand there, but there's no actual product that actually meets that demand. So your product immediately meets that latent need. You may be providing a product that is at a competitive price that is sufficient for someone who, let's say, for example, someone who is absolutely loyal to the Apple-based devices, whether it's a smartwatch, whether it's a smartphone. But if the price is sufficiently low and it meets all the functions and features of an Apple-based, let's say, smartphone, maybe a subset of those customers are not as loyal as Apple think, and they may be prepared to jump and subscribe to your product. So price points can matter. Price points can help you steal customers from your competitor. There are also other values. So customers might value the fact that you provide superior customer service, speed to service. You might provide a product that is more accurate, more refined in terms of the types of data, especially in a digital health setting, capturing data that is more relevant than your competitor. The qualitative value is also important. The design of your product, the ability for the customer to be able to customize that their data, especially in a digital health context, the convenience of using your particular product over a competitor, and does this product actually help reduce risk? And I'll give some examples of what I mean by that. These are all examples of where you, when you're developing that product, can capture, help the customer see, I think I like your product more because it helps me capture a range of values. So an example of that is, I'll use an implantable loop recorder as a competitor to this product called AliveCore. Now, this product is known, AliveCore had a portable device that you can actually buy on a shopping cart. And I actually bought this device for personal reasons. The cardiologist will often recommend an implantable loop recorder to actually assess the rhythm, the heart rhythm on a daily basis. Now, this is an invasive procedure to put an implant like this into a person. It costs $3,000, but for certain conditions and certain scenarios, this device, which is no bigger than the size of your palm, linked to a smartphone app, costs $200. You can buy it off the web, arrives within a week. And in terms of its recordings, it captures an EEG in similar quality to that is being recorded by an implantable loop recorder. Well, if I was a patient and I just wanted to inform my cardiologist that I'm having a cardiac event, let's say a tachycardia, and my cardiologist is telling me, well, actually, the information that can be communicated to me using this AliveCore device is just as good as an implantable. Well, it's a no-brainer for me to actually buy this device as opposed to saying to my cardiologist, admit me to hospital and have this device implanted so that you can get a similar reading as an AliveCore. So from a price point perspective, that's valuable to me. Accuracy, well, no different to a competitor. If in a particular setting, it's important. Meets the clinician needs, because the cardiologist would say to me, yeah, just email me the PDF that is coming out of AliveCore, and I will be able to make some clinical judgments. The other challenge is for a customer like me, when I buy AliveCore, it came within 7 days. It was convenient, it was easy to purchase, but there was significant attraction of the risk involved was significantly reduced. I didn't have to go into hospital. I didn't have to go into undergo a procedure. I didn't want to open myself up to risk of infection in hospital and so on. So these are examples of value proposition that is important for you to understand and be able to articulate when you are developing that product, and when you're developing a pitch to try and convince an investor on why your product is better than that of a competitor and why it would potentially meet a latent demand. So I took this off a website. This is a portable kind of wireless blood pressure monitor, and this website Value actually has a whole range of medical devices that it sells. But I just captured this screenshot just to highlight some of the language of you would use to describe value proposition. And value proposition, the language used is distinct from describing function and features. So it's really important that you make that distinction. So when you want to communicate that value to the customer, you want to say that it's medically accurate. That for me as a customer, that is valuable. It's portable. Yes, I don't want a bulky device that I have to carry around. It has a wide range of performance cuts. Yes, so I buy this for my whole family. I want someone who is, slightly a different size to me to be able to also use this device. Multi-user, that's appealing too, because I'm not just using it for myself. I'm using it for the rest of my family and my parents as well. Free, sort of smartphone attachments and ability to be compatible with different iOS apps is also important. It has a rechargeable battery, so that is valuable to me, and so on and so forth. So these are the language of what we consider as value proposition, distinct from describing a function or a feature. So I would now like to talk about how you capture, how you actually sell your product across different channels. how do you actually communicate and reach out to different customer segments to deliver your value proposition? So the value of the channels to the company is really raising awareness of your products, allowing customers to understand what that value proposition is, and being able to communicate that, yes, you have post-purchase customer support and so on. So I'm going to talk about the different types of channels to market, which you are all very familiar with. So you can have some that have a direct sales force, some that have an own store. So Harvey Norman is an example of a brick and mortar approach where customers can go direct to the store. We have web store, which I've just shown you here, and we've all bought products and services through web stores. And then you can actually go direct to the wholesaler, or you can go to partner stores as well. So these are examples. So from this particular site, you can buy a whole range of medical devices through these types of stores. They are not as costly as having a direct sales force, because this can be set up as a platform, and the maintenance of that platform is considerably less from a cost perspective than of having, you know, a person expensive store. That's a very expensive value proposition expensive for the company itself. The customer and your relationship to your customer is also really critical. How you actually acquire your customer segment and foster that relationship. What is the type of relationship you want to establish with each of your customer segment? So I'll give you an example of a customer segment. If you're targeting communication to the pediatric market, well, you're not really communicating to the young adults. You're not communicating just to the 7-year-old that will be using that device. You've got other important people that are making that decision, and the customer there is the parents of the child itself. So how you build a relationship with the actual customer, which is the parents, is really important. And how will you convince, as I mentioned earlier, a customer to switch? And this is really challenging. This is something that comes under a process where you really need to refine your value proposition, because some customers are incredibly loyal to a brand, particularly Apple-based customers. I'm not a Apple-based customer. I'm more an Android, but the challenge is also, well, if you're a company like Apple, how do you steal market share from Samsung? Or how do you steal market share from Google Pixel and so on? These are the challenges that for any company. So there are many different types of customer relationships, and rather than go through each of those in that table, I'll just give maybe 3 or 4 examples of what I mean by the different types of customer relationships. So you can have long-term ongoing relationships with your customers through a sales force. So pharmaceutical companies do this very well. They have a dedicated sales force that pays regular visits to hospitals, to GP clinics, to flag what's in the market, to encourage the clinicians to actually consider prescribing their particular therapeutic goods or their particular medical device. You can also have going from a sales force that is very expensive and costly to a company, and companies like Pfizer can afford it, to a personal assistant. Personal assistants are really like the Harvey Normans, and if you go to an Apple store, there's always a salesperson there, comes up and says hello to you, helps you out with some of your decision making, right through to a self-service where there's no one there. You go to a web store, you subscribe to that service. So you can see that from a high touch point perspective, where there is a sales force engaging with the customer, to almost no touch points with the customer except through a digital platform. So it's important to consider how you want to engage with the customer, how you're going to promote that product, and what are the mediums or channels to market that particular product itself. The next building block that I want to also highlight is you've got your value proposition down pat. You have identified not just one market segment or customer segment, but you potentially have 2 or 3 customer segments, and 2 or 3 of those customer segments may have distinctive value propositions. So I also want to highlight that value proposition is not just to for the whole company, but can be targeted to each customer segment in itself. Now, once you've defined all of that, then you do also need to think about your revenue stream, because at the end of the day, you have to make money for the business. You've got to keep your business solvent. Once you incorporate that business, it is, even though some might say, oh, I'm incorporating it not as a proprietary limited, but as a not-for-profit. Well, you are not, you can't generate loss from as an incorporated entity. So you need to still bring money through the door. So how are you going to generate cash for each of the customer segments that you have? So, and how, where are the pricing strategies that will be attractive for those customers? And the way that you actually determine those is doing that homework, talking to the customers, talking to a whole range of partners, understanding where you fit in terms of your pricing strategy compared to your competitor, and so on and so forth. And your revenue model has to ensure that your company actually makes money. It is actually profitable. So it's very important to get this right. And often when pitches are developed to, and they deliver that pitch to investors, when they talk about the revenue, sometimes investors are not convinced, because there's one thing to be proposing a revenue model. They fail to actually communicate what the cost base is. And if your costs exceeds that of the revenue, well, then you're making a loss and you're not bringing in cash to the company. So I just want to highlight an example of using Cardia or the AliveCore product as an example of how the company is making money. So the company has not just the hardware itself, but it has a subscription model. So the hardware might be this little device that costs $200, but where they get that recurring revenue stream, so that recurring revenue stream is really important as ongoing cash through the door, because having a subscription model is really, really important, and it draws and builds traction and relationship with the customer itself. So Cardia or AliveCore has a subscription model where there's a free freemium model where you can subscribe and get free services for 3 months, after which point you will have to upgrade and pay for a monthly subscription fee. It's a similar model to how Netflix works, to all the other live streaming services work. But what's attractive about having a subscription model is that the company has an ongoing relationship with the customer itself, and that's really key. And there is an ongoing revenue stream. And the importance of that ongoing revenue stream with that subscription model is you're continually capturing data about the customer. And data is really an important point of IP and asset for the company. So there are many reasons why, I always say to someone when they have an initial device that is a hardware, my next question is, are you able to develop a subscription model that complements that hardware? So Xbox is an example where you might have the hardware there, But where is the company making money? It's ongoing selling of the software products. So subscription models are very similar in that regard. So there are many ways to get that revenue stream, but I always think the subscription fee is much more attractive to investors, because they can say that, oh, this is an ongoing revenue stream as opposed to a one-off sale item of a medical equipment. So a company that is a digital-based company can have many different revenue streams. One through selling their hardware, subscription model. They may on-sell or white label that software that they have developed to other companies and get a licensing deal through that. They may get revenue streams through advertising, for example. If media such as The Age or the TV channels feel that they can actually use your platform to advertise their services. So I just want to, let's see here. ResMed also, I just want to highlight, that has an interesting revenue stream where they have a rental model of their devices. So it gives you an example of how different companies, even multinationals, try and think of different models to make money. And if you are a software company, you have a hardware, but you also have a software product itself, think about the premium pricing model, think about different tiers to actually get revenues through the door. So if you're selling a software product to an organization with 100 or more thousands of staff, you can think about offering, depending on the size of the users, different licensing models and different subscription models. So I just now want to move on to looking at key resources. I have to say that I'm looking at my other screen. So if you see me looking at this way, that's because my slides are on another monitor here. But I want to highlight that key resources here are encouraging you, as you think about your business and your startup, to think about what are the most important assets required to make your business model work. What resources does your company have to communicate and offer your value proposition? Who do you have in your team? Even if you're starting out as a startup, whether you are a mature company like a scale-up, how do you manage that distribution channel? Who do you have in your team to assist you in that? What is your strategy to develop customer relationship? As I said, you want to not only just sell a one-off device, because if you sell a one-off device, you don't maintain that relationship, and the subscription model helps you with that. Who is going to help you generate those revenue streams? These are important resources that help the company get that money to the door. So I'm going to use Maxonic as an example, because again, Maxonic, like 3D Meditech, is a partner of ARC Summit. And here, if you have a company like Maxonic, Maxonic is now housed at Melbourne Connect. And it's great to see a strong and strategic partnership that the University of Melbourne have, especially with Peter and Peter Lee and David Ackland, have a good relationship with Maxonic. And in this case, the key resources within Maxonic, I would think, would be their management, the quality of the executive leadership team with different skill sets to contribute to all the different building blocks that I've just mentioned. They have a marketing executive, they have a chief operating officer, a CEO, and so on. Because without key management, you can have the best technology available, but no one of experience, capability to manage that company. Well, I've seen companies fail because they have not got the right people in their management team. to drive the business strategy, to drive that business model. And if you don't have the right people to help validate that business model will not help you get cash through the door. The other resources are some of the physical assets that they may have, and some of those physical assets might then be intellectual property, their IP. And IP can be the brand, can be patents that they have, can be the customer database, the actual data that is being collected when they actually engage with clients, when they have the scans, they develop the anatomical models, and then leads to a designed implant. All of that is valuable intellectual property. And of course, they must have a good pricing model and a good financial model that includes their cost base in order to ensure that the company is operating profitably. And the profit is really important to keep the company solvent. So these are really important resources to consider because very often, as technologists and in engineering and IT, we're so focused on the technology. And often a common mistake is people coming up to me to say, I have this amazing technology, it can do X, Y, and Z. And then I say, well, have you validated that technology? Who are the key resources that will help you build a company to take this technology to the right target segment that you have? And often it's a technology looking for a problem, and that's always a danger sign there. So be very aware that a successful business is not just the fact that that company has an amazing technology. The management matters, how you run the business matters. So if you look at examples of companies such as Maxonic that delivers their products and services, well, they have software development, having the right people to do software development, to do design development, to move product from concept to a minimum viable product, to undertake clinical trials. They're all really important. Having people on board that understands intellectual property management is essential. Understanding the regulatory environment and the reimbursement strategies are all very important as well. So you can see that when it comes to developing a business strategy and using tools like Business Model Canvas, there are so many things that come into play to make that startup work, to make it a viable proposition for investors to want to invest in your business itself. Now, I've just touched on the word investors, and I want to highlight now the importance for establishing the right partnerships. Who are your suppliers and your networks that will make your business model work, that will help you bring money through the door? And you must identify those strategic alliances. So there are some key considerations. You have some potential strategic alliances in the medtech, especially in the hospital environment. Who are your key opinion leaders? Universities that might help co-develop new technology, help you build up your product portfolio, and who are the potential investors and manufacturers that come into play. I'd like to give an example of key partnerships, and Epiminder is one that I will use. This is a company that has been spun out through the University of Melbourne. It is an initiative of Professor Mark Cook. He's a key opinion leader, a neurologist, and really an expert in epilepsy. So Professor Cook and his team has developed a device that has been, I guess, inspired by the cochlear implant technology. And here it's a device called the Minder that can actually monitor long-term epileptic seizures. So it's a clever device. It was spun out, as I said, and it became a startup in 2017. with initial shareholders at University of Melbourne, the Bionics Institute, Cochlear, and St Vincent's Hospital. So you can see the different categories of partnerships there. And then more recently, they found a group of investors who, as a result, led Epiminder to receive $18 million in revenue. Well, why do they need so much money? Well, you need a lot of money to undertake clinical, to validate your technology through clinical trials. So these are examples, again, of how important key partnerships are. Now, we're coming close to the end of the use of this business model canvas. And one of the key things that many people forget is to understand the cost structure, because if your cost model is higher than your revenue model, exceeds your revenue model, you're in big trouble, you're operating at a loss. So it's really important to understand what are your fixed costs, what are your variable costs, that includes costs of goods sold or bill of materials to create that product, and you need to think about economies of scale and scope. So I'll just very simplistically give you an example. If you have a device that's cost $50, your raw materials cost and the cost to assemble and manufacture are $625. That's your subtotal cost is $12.50. Your gross profit is $37.50. So we talk about what is your gross profit margin, 75%. So what I'm going to do here is introduce you to the language, some of the financial language that's being used. And often it's important to include these types of modeling in your pitch to investors. So I'm going to use ResMed as an example. The data is taken from 2022, their Q2 financial data, because they're a listed company. A lot of this information is available to the public. So ResMed is a multinational company. It's a device that tries to manage patients with sleep apnea. They have a mask, and then they have this particular ResMed AirSense machine. So a few of my friends have this device, and they found them really helpful, improve the quality of their sleep. So ResMed highlighted their gross profit margin was 58%. And then when they included their operating profit margin, which includes their fixed costs, they ended up with a net profit margin of 15%. That's pretty healthy. What do they do when they have a net profit margin of 15%? That means that the profits can be reinvested back into the company, or if they have shareholders, then they can distribute it as dividends to their shareholders. So that's an example of understanding some of the financial language that's being used. I'm coming up to the last two or three slides. So it's really important, regardless of the maturity of your business, whether you're a startup, scale-up, or a more mature business, is continually reevaluating your business model, working with your leadership team to actually say, has my business model changed? Has the environment changed? Has my market segment changed? We've seen, for example, COVID-19 was the catalyst to that lead to the demise of a lot of businesses, because they didn't have the strategy of reevaluating where they are in the context of an externality. So a pandemic, for example. So how do you ensure that you have a business model that is resilient and then can weather the storm, or can counter a potential entry of a new competitor into the marketplace? Understand what is happening to the industry, what are the global trends around the world. So continually doing that environmental scan is really, really important. So here's an overview of, at the macro level, what happens when you do that environmental scan. Well, you need to look at what's the regulatory scans. If there's a regulatory reform that might impact your business, that it's coming down in the next 3 or 5 years, if you're not up to date with that, and you've missed the boat on some of the key compliance requirements, well, as a medtech company, you're in trouble. If a new entrant has entered the market and you are completely caught off guard because that new entrant has not just an attractive pricing model that is cheaper than yours, but in all its value proposition is much better than your value proposition, then you're in trouble as well. So I think it's really important, as I said, to keep doing that ongoing market scan. Regulation, I'm not going to touch too much on regulation because I think CIMMYT has been talking about this and discussing it, and I know that some of you have actually signed up and done the course about ISO 13485. So I'm going to just skip over this and to mention that if you're not aware of the regulatory reforms in the personalized medical device space, I suggest you Google that and learn more about what are some of the requirements and some of the new terminology that has been introduced by the Therapeutic Goods Administration, such as patient-matched medical devices. And also, I'd suggest that you do a search on the internet to understand what's happening in the European Union, what's happening into the medical device regulation, because there are new reforms happening in the Northern Hemisphere that may affect your product and services. So as I come to the end of this particular webinar, I'd like to emphasize that the business model canvas is only a tool. It is a good tool, but as all tools come into play, work with your team to work through who are your key partners, your activities, your resources, value proposition. How do you build customer relationships? How are you going to distribute the product? What channels? Who are your market segments? Do you have one customer segment or do you have multiple customer segments? And if you have multiple customer segments, they may have different partners and different value propositions. So don't assume a one-size-fits-all approach. And if you have multiple customer segments, you may have to consider your cost structures might be different depending on your customer segment, and your revenue streams might be different depending on your customer segment as well. And this cannot be a desktop exercise. It cannot be an in-house only exercise. Once you've identified this, you've got to go out, leave the building, leave the office, leave your desk, talk to as many people, talk to as many partners to validate your model and keep doing it regularly. So at this point, I'm going to finish up and opening up for discussion. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm happy to take questions at this time.
Thank you, Jia Yee. Yes, you can type your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box. Yeah, maybe I'll kick off with some questions. I think one of the challenges with a lot of us who are in the tech or research area is that this whole thing about technology looking for a customer, and it quite often starts like this. Right. So I think that what you show, with the business canvas model allows to think a little bit deeper that, are there existing customer that would be interested in what we are doing? But it seems like the business canvas model is for more mature technology rather than somebody who has a tech trying to look for a customer. Is that the case, or?
Actually, the business model canvas is used by a range of startups. They found it particularly helpful. Because what's happened is that when you use this type and you have a tool like this to guide decision making and team discussions, it widens your vision and your ability to go, well, actually, perhaps this technology is not best suited in the area that I thought it might be initially designed for. right? So it can open up a whole range of opportunities that you may not have otherwise considered. Because sometimes we're so focused on the technology development, thinking that this is right up the alley of this particular medical clinical condition, when after you've done the exercise and you've gone out and validated it, you might find that, yes, what I thought was a great idea, when in actual fact, there's really no demand for it. Or you might realize that after talking to the clinician actually said, this might look interesting, but have you thought of this? You know, I'm not particularly interested in the way the device is currently configured, but you know, have you considered doing it this way or customizing it in another way? So I think you can use the technology as a conversation starter with your end user and getting a lot of that intellectual insights from the end user. So yes, there are some values in having said, yes, I've got a particular technology and I want to validate it, but the business model canvas can also help you decide on, have I missed out on something else that I would not otherwise consider?
Thanks, Jia. We have a question from Micah. He says, thank you very much for the talk. When performing these environmental scans to identify key trends, both domestically and globally, what for you personally are your favorite resources, publication, or info sources? Yeah,
so I think one of the way that you do environmental scanning, of course, is them. So for me, I'll give an example. Environmental scanning involves not just desktop doing your Google searches and not just subscribe. I subscribe to a whole range of newsletters, right? I subscribe to a whole range of medical device news sites, trying to understand what is going on in the industry. But I also get my environmental scanning by going on a whole range of workshops, conferences, going to, peak bodies that hold regular annual meetings. So for example, in Melbourne, there's the Melbourne Network. They often have monthly seminar programs. The one that I recently went to was in the area of supply chain for health. So, and that was really valuable. So that is an environmental scan to actually understand, well, what is happening in the supply chain in Victoria? Because without understanding who to go to when you talk about selling a product, then you won't know how to develop your supply chain strategy, right? So going to these types of webinars, and if you are not used to going to these types of industry-based seminars, well, I would suggest start going to some of the more local ones that are not too expensive. So Melbourne Network, when their seminars, they're not very expensive. They're sometimes at $50, and if you don't go in person, the webinars are around $30 to attend virtually. So I would say that try and always do that environmental scan. I do environmental scan daily just by doing a lot of reading about what's happening, talking to my networks, having informal coffees with people who work in the multinational area, even talking to investors. So it's really important. So thanks for the question.
Yep, we got another question. What is the best approach to getting seed investors? Fairly loaded question.
Yeah, so the seed this is important as well. So seed investors. So if you look at Epiminder, Epiminder is, and also CA Medical. So I'll use Epiminder because I used it as an example. Epiminder got their seed investment after many years of negotiating maybe 2 years of negotiating to get the license out of the university, to find the right founding partners to actually go in business with. Like it's not easy to just say, hey, Cochlear, I've got a wonderful device, come and join me as a shareholder, as a business partner in a spin-out. That requires, for Cochlear, approval from their boss and from their board, and the board will basically say, well, why do we need to be involved in the spin-out? Because we will be investing our cash into this company. So what is the compelling value proposition for the spin-out? So these types of dialogues don't happen overnight, and the way that you attract seed funding is, as I say, find tools to help you validate your business model and keep refining that pitch, because ultimately the investor is presented with at any given day, an investor can see up to 20 or 30, if not 50 opportunities. And what they will do is they might say, oh, you might think you have a compelling value proposition, but the investor will say, well, if I've got 20 today on my desk, they're going to prioritize it. Which one of these is going to make money for me? Which one will, for the $1 that I invest, will get me $4 back or $5 back in cash return in a shorter time frame? So it's a lot of homework. It's a lot of pitching. It's a lot of refinement of your business model. And those who have done the University of Melbourne biodesign course. So that is a very successful program run by Professor David Graydon, and the Masters of Engineering students who have come out of that course. There have been at least 6 startups, and of these startups, they've been very successful getting investment. Some of them getting, even at least $1 million of initial investment in, right? But if you talk to the CEOs of these startups, who are recent graduates of the Master of Engineering, they would say, oh, I have delivered more than 50 pitches internationally and at the national level. So you can imagine that every time they do a pitch, they'll get feedback. It will refine their business model and so on. So they keep, and this is a common story for every entrepreneur that spins out a company.
Yeah, we've got a question from Chris. We've got 2 more questions and 2 minutes. Can you share any experience you have with the university spin-out, how IP arrangements have worked? Is there a method that VCs prefer if you are looking for investment? In regards to IP?
So I think I already highlighted that in terms of the spin-outs, university spin-outs, it depends on the appetite of the university, and also, and the question around IP arrangement is also important, because investors want to be able to see that the IP is licensed and that there's not encumbered in any way, that they have done their due diligence to say that there is no other owner of that IP. So sometimes when researchers do their work and it's based on background IP, and if you don't ask the right question, well, where did the background IP come from? And then they go, oh, actually, about 10 years ago, I had a collaboration with another company, and so that contributed to the background IP, and that was 10 years ago. And we haven't really done much about it. Then it raises questions, the tech transfer that will then need to go, well, is that IP compromised, right? If that is, then we need to have a discussion with the original company and say, are they happy to release that IP to the University of Melbourne, so that the IP then becomes clean and can be licensed to that startup. So university in the last few years have done licensing deals to startups. I'm aware that there's one or two in train. So it is a good model, because the university owns that IP. You can't get out of that. So VCs will be happy to have a discussion. Let's say if you are operating on your own and have developed a technology that is not assigned to any, not tied to any university or research organization, then you can have that direct conversation with the VCs. But for all of us, you know, whether it's Peter, David, or myself, if I have developed it within the university environment, then the university owns the IP. So we need to work very closely with our tech transfer team to make sure that the IP is clean and can be licensed to a spin-out.
Thank you, Jia Yee. We ran out of time, so I think we'll wrap up here. And thanks very much for your participation and for the excellent question. And once again, let's virtually clap for Jia Yee. And thanks very much, Jia Yee, for the wonderful talk.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And don't hesitate to contact me for coffee or anything like that. Happy to have further discussions with you on this area. Bye.
Bye.